So you saying the thing about capitalism, you can't make a person blah blah blah, but you can make people do stuff. You can
No, they
buy
can't make you.
conditional.
They can't make you. They can't make you get a. They can't make you buy more house than you really can afford. You are a complete idiot if you feel like 30% is what you should. I should take 30% of my income and pay for my house.
But if
You are a complete
but if
idiot.
people
You are a complete. The top. You're a complete idiot if you say give me a 30-year mortgage. I can afford this. Give me a 30-year mortgage.
but you do know that that's how society is run, by normalization, by commercials, by showing you stuff on TV.
It
What they call that they manufacture consent. They
victim.
manufacture, but that's
Victim
how
mentality.
but that's how society runs. They don't. You go to
So let me
school.
tell you how
They don't.
simple this is.
You go to school. They don't
No,
give
no, no,
you
no, 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 time out.
okay.
This is what the issue is, and I cannot allow you to push victimization because this is how simple it is. Oh, how do I? How do you charge me interest? Okay, so it's accruing quarterly. Okay, so that means that if I borrow $250,000 every quarter, is going to accrue at 4%. So that means every quarter I'm no. Let me make it simple. If I go get this 200,000, so that means every quarter I'm paying $8,000 in interest. Okay. So my house note is how much? $1,900. So in 3 months, how much do I pay? Oh shit, that's not $8,000. So I'm actually accruing more interest than okay. So let me figure this out. So that means that if I'm paying accrued interest 4 times a year at $8,000, or it's going to be fractionally less because you're paying towards it. But let's just say you say 8,000, 7,000, 6,000, 5,000 by that. Okay, so that means that damn, that means every year I'm paying 20,000, $25,000 for this loan. So maybe I can't afford this 200,000, $250,000 house just because I can make the payment. Or okay, so this house is 250,000. Um, I know I can pay less than half the interest if I get a 15-year mortgage. So can I afford that note? No, I can't afford that note because now my note goes from 1,900 to 2,700 a month. Okay, well I can't afford this house. We don't do that. That's not what we do. So again, we play victim and then say it's a conspiracy, it's the government, it's the boogeyman, it's somebody telling me, but we're making the decision.
But
We
that
don't have to.
that doesn't negate the fact that there is someone telling you.
You're listening to the Bean Pie Chronicles podcast. So kick off your leather socks and unpin your head wrap. The Bean Pie Chronicles is now on the air.
All right, we're all live. Assalamu alaikum. We're back again this week. New episode of Bean Pie Chronicles. Today we have in addition to Doc Riyaad, we have my man Fifth Element, Khalil Fifth Element with us. Assalamu alaikum. What's going on, man?
Slam. What's going on to the people? What's going on to my folks, man? How y'all feeling today, man?
Chilling. So just to get back into it, right back into it. Last week we had a conversation. We spoke about the current state of black economics. To be specific, we spoke about the idea of black capitalism. Is it myth or is it legend or myth? What we call it, myth or cap or some shit. And so today we want to
fact or fiction.
Right, fact or fiction. So this week we want to continue because obviously, if anybody's paying attention to anything in the news, the economy is still teetering, or some people say teetering, or it's a hot topic right now. With the inflation, with going, with the banks collapsing, and all this financial turmoil. This is still a hot conversation, so we want to almost have like a part 2 of the conversation. Before we started recording, we kind of mentioned that, like I said, if you hadn't been paying attention to what was going on with the banking, one of the banks, one of the large European banks, Credit Suisse, came close to having economic meltdown, partially because Saudi Arabia who I guess is one of their depositors and economic support, refused to throw more money behind the bank and loan them any more money. So the Swiss government had to come in and sort of bail them out. And I thought that was sort of an interesting development, because as Muslims here in America, we often don't really have any context or conversation or financial literacy. We're not really vested, and I'm saying that general. I don't, as individuals, we get to have many different states of conditions of relationships with the economic system. Us three guys here, we're all businessmen. You guys are much more in tune with the financial system than myself. So there's different degrees of relationship with economics and knowledge. But as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I'm aware of, and I've been Muslim all my life, so I've been around in different communities. I don't know any community that has a serious financial economic literacy program. So when I seen that Saudi Arabia was involved, it kind of reminded me that we've sort of taken this position. And again, I'm generalizing by using the term we, but African American Muslims in particular, they seem to have sort of a default anti-banking, obviously with the interests, and all of our banks here have interests, and there's haram, the haram police is around every corner. So to find out that, hey, the Saudi Arabian government is deeply vested in Western banking system, that gives you pause and say, okay, what else is going on that where we are taking ourselves out of the system. Meanwhile, the people who you can say have had a lot of influence on some of these decisions, they're knee deep in it in Western finance.
Yeah, well, just to give a quick comment, Saudi Arabia, part of their deal in order to become Saudi Arabia was to, the British first went over there and formed and backed the Saud family, and it became Saudi Arabia, basically backed in part based on the fact that oil was found there and they would use their banking and go through a Western banking system. So this idea that Muslims aren't involved in capitalism or Western banking is just absolutely ridiculous to me. And the fact that in 2023, we still push this narrative as if two of the largest funds that provide commercial loans and large home loans, which would, basically are collateralized similar to a commercial loan, are Arab families from Abu Dhabi, from Saudi, from Kuwait. So they're heavily in all of these westernized economic functions, and they make money, and they've been making money for years. If you talk to any of the larger I'm losing it, but the block pools of money, one of you guys can tell me what it's called when you pull a bunch of money together and then you lend it out. I can't think what, I'm just losing it right now. But anyway, those are the largest contributors to those are Saudi, and Arabs from Dubai.
Right.
So now you did bring up Credit Suisse, and I kind of know where you guys are going because both of you seem to be I'm on the opposite end of conspiracy theories or these overriding, thought processes. I can name you 20 companies over the last 10 years that got bailed out. Ford, Chrysler, Bank of America. How many banks did we bail out during COVID. All of our major banks got bailed out. This is management, but it's not indicative of gross domestic product from the country. So there's other economic indicators other than being able to say, oh, well, this bank had an issue. And there's other issues in play at that same time. So if you take, for instance, Silicon Valley Bank, some of the investors, based on how they were doing business, decided that they wanted to pull their money. So there was a money run, and they couldn't cover the money run based off of them saying that they're not going to pay dividends on their bonds. So all this stuff, that was just bad business. Credit Suisse, same thing. Lending to too many people, feeling like they can cover the spread. But, you know,
Let me ask you a quick question with that before I go off and make my point. But just to, I guess, have you elaborate further on that. Do you think that this overextension and over leveraging do you think that it was limited to just those banks, or do you think that is it more indicative of a systemic issue?
Oh no, it's definitely a systemic issue, and it's all generated from greed. So, for instance, even if you look at Silicon Valley Bank, they paid dividends a couple hours before they decided that they had to default. So this is simply greed. They knew what they were doing. It's the money run, and as a matter of fact, one of the people that got the biggest dividend came from the other bank that failed. I can't think of the name of it over at
Lehman Brothers.
Yeah, Lehman Brothers, right. So we allow these same characters to be greedy. Why? Because over the course of 10 years, the brother from Lehman Brothers made people a whole lot of money. So we allow this to happen, and then you just swap it over to a new bank. You just swap it over to a new platform. For instance, I was looking at the platform. What is it? The one for technology companies that does the crowdfunding, and now they're not doing any loans or anything right now because they're getting ready to get bought out. So all the financial markets change because we get more and more interconnected. We get more and more sophisticated, and literally chickens not hatching in China affect automobiles in Oklahoma being made now. So
I'm gonna switch this up just a little bit before I go in and to make my point. I'm gonna continue to ask you some questions to not necessarily steer the conversation, but to legitimately get your opinion and your point of view on this particular topic before I make my point. Yeah. So we said that we agree that this is indicative of something that's systemic on some level, right? Now the next question that you're right, from greed, right? So then the next question that I would ask you in regards to that is, do you feel that going forward, the people will have any say in how the economic system goes forward? Or do you think that it will be something that is totally steered by the central bank system? Do you think that it will continue to be business as usual, where we have a never-ending cycle of a fiat graveyard and then they just reissue another currency afterwards? Or do you think that eventually the people will get tired of this quote-unquote invisible tax that is the inflation, realize it at some point, and decide to make another decision? Because like I said, that's not necessarily a conspiracy thing. When you look at how these banks failed, this was a point that I was making to Idris earlier, where it was like, all right, so SVP failed, and then all of a sudden you had a bank run. People were kind of scrambling to figure out where they were going to put their money. It was kind of becoming a generalized understanding, even as Janet Yellen was getting questioned by one of the congressmen, that as a result of these bailouts, what it was essentially doing was encouraging large depositors to take their monies out of the regional banks where they were getting the majority of their credit fundings and put them into larger banks, because essentially the Treasury was telling them, if your money's in the smaller banks, we won't bail you out, but if it's in the larger banks, we will. So at that particular point, it's like, we are entering into a stage where the people have gold, they have Bitcoin, they have all of these different options to throw their money into as a quarter, or throw their energy into as a store of wealth. So yes, Bank of America, as one of those big banks that would be too big, that would get bailed out by the Treasury, they got, $15 billion added to their money. So it was like, yes, we saw money go from regional banks to Bank of America and $15 billion, but 100 billion went to Bitcoin. And that wasn't, and the market cap for cryptocurrency went back over $1 trillion again. So that's where I'm just simply asking, like, as far as, yes, I'm not disagreeing with any, especially you, in regards to how things used to be and what the understanding of how business used to flow, or maybe even currently is flowing. But I'm asking, do you think that will it continue to be that way going forward, recognizing that, like, there are alternatives, not just in currencies, but also in regards to, like, economies. And then I'll as a quick example with that, the patriot economy. Like, you see, like, a dude like Mike Lindell with his My Pillow, he gets canceled out of the major retailers. So now he goes direct through the public and through the major podcasts, and now he's selling more pillows through direct marketing than he is through the other avenues. Or somebody like Joe Rogan now has a greater exposure through the media avenues than all of the major networks combined. So there is an alternative economy or society in the Patriot example that arose. And then I believe that that's also an example of how it could arise within the African American community. And I guess maybe even as a niche, the African American Muslim community. So you give those as examples to be like, it's not necessarily a conspiracy theory. We have real life examples of it. Do you think that it will continue to be the way it was? Or do you think there's a possibility, at the very least, that we have to create a risk percentage for in our calculations that, yeah, things could be possibly changing, and the people could be waking up in a way where they decide they don't want it to be business as usual anymore?
So I'm going to answer your question, but I want to finish with just so to answer your question. We get comfortable and we get used to things, and we forget that the purpose of capitalism is to provide the consumer with the consumer wants. So ultimately, the consumer always has power, and capitalism cannibalizes this competition. So if there's a better way that's not decentralized, because no government is gonna go for this whole decentralized process, because a lot of times we ask for things without any type of foresight, or without any type of we use hikmah, without any type of wisdom. If you have a decentralized banking system, how do you pay for the road? How do you pay for the sewage system? How do you pay for free education, schools? How do you pay for welfare? How do you pay for, national parks and state parks and city parks and all these all that type of stuff? So this desire that we think that we want to have this decentralized government off my, hands situation is lunacy, and it's very childlike in nature. Just remind me to use the example of FTX once I finish answering your question. Just give me a reminder, because I'll be forgetting shit. But so to have this desire, or to have this thought process, to want a different fiat other than money and the central banking system is something that's acceptable, but to have it decentralized without any government oversight, or without it being beneficial to the government, which makes all of our lives a little bit easier. Of course, there's a lot of things about the government that we don't like and we want to change. But in America, what I can tell you is the consumer leads politics, and we forget that because we think individually. So if we don't want to put our money in Bank of America, we don't have to put our money in Bank of America. SVP failed, not because they failed prior to the bank run, they failed after the bank run. So there was no failure. They made a bad, selfish decision. And so because of that bad, selfish decision that they made, they could have been cool. But the fact that angel investors and investors in these large tech companies that hadn't seen a profit started getting nervous and was like, I need to protect myself at this point, go get my money. So at that point, based on them making a selfish decision about bonds, saying that they weren't going to cover the additional money on the bonds that they set themselves, or they weren't going to buy the bonds back at that time, based on them making that selfish decision because they wanted to pay themselves dividends. That's the situation that happened. The fundamentals of that bank failure was not a larger economic issue. Same thing with Credit Suisse. Everyone wants to bank with Credit Suisse. Everyone wants to loan with Credit Suisse. And Credit Suisse is one of the largest funders of large-scale construction. So they're funding in the billions. They're funding in the hundreds. 5, 6, 7, 800 million, like the same way the local credit union gives out loans for cars. So at some point,
they're not giving out in the same way. That was actually going to be one of the questions I asked. You say that how are they lending out this money? Are they lending out our deposits, or are they lending out based on loans that they're gathering using our deposits as collateral?
Well, that's what I'm saying. So it's all computer programming. So no bank has the money to cover what they lend out.
Okay, so now we're except for credit unions. So now we're getting to exactly what I'm saying.
They're not banks, though.
Agreed, and that's one of the reasons why I guess we would say, as a little quick side note, as far as for the people out there. So without things getting too complicated, I highly recommend that, at least as far as monies that they keep, as not as you might keep a major bank for transactions, especially if you're a businessman in any type of way. You might want to keep a nationwide 1A bank, blah blah blah. But as far as money that you keep your hold on to, you want that money in the credit union. I don't even say regional bank at that point. I say credit union. Now I don't necessarily know how but based upon even the points that you were just making, they're not a retail bank, so therefore there are certain protections and certainly less or more regulations in regards to the restrictions they put on speculative lending that limit how risky their investments are in comparison to one of these other banks that we might otherwise have our money in, that you just said they're not required to really keep any of it in there at this point.
Right. But like I said, capitalism can also be cannibalism. So on one side, you're saying again, protect my money. I don't want my money in there, whatever. But at the same time, how do you get a $2 million, $5 million, $10 million, $20 million, $50 million, $100 million project done if it's not for the speculative banking? So
project funding, hedge funds, REITs.
Same thing. They have to have some type of banking. They have to have some type of system to put their money in. All of it. I do hear what you're saying, but at the same time, how does that happen how does that happen on a scale that we don't measure on centuries, instead of being like, oh, this needs to happen right now? You need to take your money out these banks, you need to put it in credit unions, and you need to go to hedge funds and part of what the issue is hedge funds, banks, and at least banks have some type of limitations. At least banks have some type of social a network. As much as we hate banks, they have some type of social networking involved in how they lend money, who they can give it to, how they give it to, and all that. Hedge funds don't care. Hedge funds come in, buy up all the houses on the block and hold them for 2 years, and then get another company that they own to come in and buy this house. It should be priced at $200,000 for $400,000 to reset the market in that whole area. So now all these houses that they hold in the neighborhood. But then they turn around. I'm just telling you what hedge funds do. But then they turn around and rent that to you at double what it would have been had the market been calibrated the way that it was supposed to through banks. So I'm saying either way, we got to choose and pick our poison. So hedge funds, going through REITs and going through all that, their bottom line is they invested without any other government oversight other than like they can make all the profits that they want to make. So they don't have to do anything social. It's all market driven. It's all, I don't mind taking this loss because I'm gonna write these taxes off for the next 2 years on these purchases that I just built, made. So basically I got the house for nothing, and then I'm gonna get another company I own to turn around and buy it. Now, if you tell me what's predatory, that's more predatory than a bank coming in and giving somebody an APR and then coming back later and being like, yeah, you got it in 3%, but now it's 9%, so your payment went up, $200-300. So but I'm saying it's not beneficial. It just seems beneficial because you have the appearance as a consumer that you have more control over your money when you have less control over what's happening in society. Because I'm telling you, all these hedge funds and REITs don't care about you, and the ones that feel it the most are the minority, the Black community. We feel it the most because they come in and buy every house in our neighborhood.
Okay, so here's the thing. First off, can we agree that some, not all, but some of these hedge funds became investment banks. Some of these investment banks became depository banks after the last 2008 crash, correct?
I mean, I don't have any specific example, but
like
I won't disagree.
Like a Goldman Sachs, as an example.
Goldman Sachs.
Yes,
okay.
Like the biggest of them all, right?
Yeah. So, I'm just saying, I just didn't have anything. I'm not disagreeing, but I just didn't have an example. But yes.
Okay. So what winds up happening is the hedge funds became the banks. And then also as well, I mean, we have to get into like that whole piggybacking aspect of things. But essentially, the point that I'm making with this is that all of these banks, that's why I go back to that original point, all of these banks have immersed themselves in that greed that you had identified earlier. I didn't disagree with that concept at all. I was just merely stating that it was not limited to SVP, and it wasn't just, some little mini isolated incident. That in actuality, like if you look at a bank like Goldman Sachs, when Bear Stearns had collapsed, when Lehman Brothers had collapsed,
I'm like Bear Stearns. Yeah.
They were at a debt to asset ratio of 30-1. Goldman Sachs is currently at 100-1. And there's only like a small amount, and most of them ironically are regional banks, that actually have a portfolio right now where they have assets that exceed their debt. And then furthermore, it's not, as you know, the banking system is not set up where they're just like loaning out our deposits. They take our deposits, use it as a collaborative asset that they then go and borrow against. And that's where this extreme leveraging is coming from. And I don't disagree with you in regards to this whole concept of, yes, you have private equity groups and banks and things of the sort that are buying up properties, and you'll own nothing and be happy because they're sitting over there buying up all the I 100% agree with that. But I'm also saying that as a result of these interest rates being raised and them leveraging all those assets, borrowing loans when it was 0% interest, now as these interest rates are rising, all of these banks are in positions now where they are paying back loan, whether it's interest only loans that they borrowed against, or whether or not it's actually with principals, but most of them were interest onlys that got balloon payments that's coming up at any given point. And then they are kind of forced at that point to liquidate assets like those houses that you're speaking of, or like these treasury bonds or things in the nature, which causes a larger situation that people are now trying to, putting themselves to try to protect against, which is where the precious metals and all the rest of I'm not going to say that even real estate at the right price is a protection against it right now still too. And likewise, cryptocurrency, depending on the one that you use. I'm not going to advocate for all of them, because something like FTX, as a quick reminder to you, because you said you'd be forgetting stuff, so I send that out there to you as a reminder, because I definitely do believe that one of the tactics that is being used by the central bankers or the people that are in opposition to Bitcoin or Gold, who've been bad mouthing both of them for the longest time as being a store of wealth, is that it's like, let me negate the entire industry. Let me badmouth that entire sector. You know what I mean? So whether it is a Dogecoin creator saying, I don't really want to do nothing with this as far as making it transactional, whether it's a FTX money launderer or anything of the sort, it's like, let's create some ones out there. Let's siphon some money away from people, have people lose some investment capital. Let's put our whales in there and then suck the money out. Like, let's do whatever we have to do to basically convince people that they shouldn't do that digital currency. But then at the same time, we already know that the New York Federal Reserve Bank has rolled out the pilot program for the central bank digital currency, and we got about 7 to 8 countries right now that are also rolling it out. So it is definitely long term a part of their agenda, but it's just very simply like with China, they want to kick out Bitcoin and then less than 6 months later roll out China's digital yuan that they now want the people to use and convert all of their energy to, no different than what they're doing in Nigeria. It's like we just happen to be further back along on the train than these other countries are. But so, yes, TX for you as a reminder.
Okay, yeah. Oh, so you kind of made my point for me about FTX and decentralized fiat. It's I mean, if you leave everything up to the consumer, then how can you plan for the future? Because it's so volatile. So in my opinion, banking is better if it's fueling capitalism as opposed to being pure capitalist. So part of what the issue is with some of these banks failing and the American banking system as it is now is that greed can still play a major part. But for the most part, the way that the banking system is set up is more of a stabilizing factor than the Bitcoins of the world. And I won't just say Bitcoin, but those digital assets. You know, it's too. I mean, I would never lend money. I would never get involved in speculating. I would never get involved in futures if everything was based on a digital coin that was consumer driven, strictly consumer driven. I would never, like, that whole industry, all those industries would die. I mean, how could you lend money to a farmer? You know, like it's too iffy, you know. So I go give a farmer where I'm already speculating that's growing oranges, and I'm speculating then there's a bad winter, so there's less oranges, and on top of that, by the time I get my money back, the coin is reduced to next to nothing. So, you know, it goes from, you know, like Bitcoin's $60,000 for a coin, now it's worth $15,000 for a coin. So I'm losing double the money. So this idea, like I said, it's often not fully thought through. I'm not saying that the current banking system that we have is the greatest, but I'm saying at least it provides some type of stability.
Wait, time out on that note. As a quick, side note to that, are you aware of the fact that the euro declined more in one day than the NASDAQ did? It declined 3%. So I mean, right, like you talk about stability and things like that, like
right, but there's more involved in that.
It is, bro. Like,
right, but there's more involved with the euro prior to the Brexit, prior to the overwhelming debt in Greece because of their stupidity in the way that they govern. You know, there were no 3% drop-offs in the euro. This is something recent. So this is bad politics. This is that whole wave of conservatism, austerity, and all that type of stuff, but they took it to the extreme. So again, there's policies that made the actual workings fail. But I do want to go back to something you said when you were talking about some of the issues that we had in America, and people want something different. The people don't want something different. So these banks took on all this additional debt based on COVID. So what were we doing as Americans during COVID? We were sitting our ass at home, not working, collecting checks. That's what we were doing. If we wanted something different, we would have been doing something different then. But we always look for the ease, the comfort, and then we play victim based on the decisions that we made. Because we could have been austere then. We could have been very austere then. And then they extended all this COVID issue. People didn't want to work, and then people came back and said, you know what, I'm so used to sitting my ass at home, I want to come back and make more money. Now, I'm not necessarily saying people shouldn't make more money, but how are you going to pay for these larger salaries? How are you going to mandate $23 an hour when we just didn't work for 2.5 years? When we had to bail out banks, when people weren't paying rent, and so a lot of these people that have these issues were the people that didn't pay rent for 2 years. So there were people that own businesses, that own companies, that own houses that didn't receive any money for 2 years while people set their ass in their property like they owned something, didn't pay nothing, and then collected them checks, and then went out and scammed and got more money and all that type of stuff. We still got to pay for that. So this whole idea that these banks are just making a bunch of bad decisions, so you end up with a Goldman Sachs that's 100-1, as you said. I don't know. I'm just gonna trust you on that. I haven't checked it. I don't think that you'll lie. So
it's definitely
right. Okay, yeah.
But also, you said that it was due to COVID. You saying that the fact that they no longer had to do didn't even have to keep the 10% with fractional lending. It didn't have to keep no money on reserves. That didn't have anything to do. That it had to do with people sitting on their ass. It didn't have nothing to do with the zero money in reserves.
What I'm saying is, when you're talking about the debt to asset ratio, a lot of that, a big chunk of that has to do with getting lent money and having to pay it back based on COVID. And so that whole situation with banks, we could not allow the banks to fail. But if we really wanted this new digital currency, if we really want this decentralized system, if we really wanted our more decision making, more responsibility, we wouldn't have sat our asses home and allowed the real estate market to get bought out by hedge funds, and then not pay the small guys their rent money, not paying the guy that owns the 2 or 3 multifamilies. He didn't get rent for 2 years. He lost everything. And then when COVID was over with, guess what? He had to come up with $300,000-$500,000 to pay for the houses that he just had built. So this is why I have an issue with this idea that all of a sudden now, because a couple of banks failed, that there's something economically wrong with the system. There's always going to be some greed in any form of capitalism.
Just so you know, the last time as a landlord, the last time I was making, because I'm not even like I was spot. I sounded just like you. You know when I sounded like you? In 2007 going into 2008, when people were just trying to say that it was just a little isolated incident, that it was no law indicative of nothing larger. You see what I'm saying? So just as a little side note with that, you always keep mindful that when the people cannot pay their rent, that is the bottom of the trickle. Because what happens if the people can't pay their rent, then the landlord can't pay their mortgage, then the CMOs don't get, you know what I'm saying? Don't get collateralized the right way, and then it starts to mess with the market on the highest level. So there's a domino effect that occurs.
The people could pay their rent, and they took advantage of the moratorium that you can't be kicked out, and they took advantage of that for 1.5 years, 2 years. So it wasn't that people couldn't pay their rent. The only thing that I'm saying is that has to be accounted for. America is a balance sheet. So there's going to be some failures based on our personal greed, based on the United States citizen sitting their ass home, being less productive, and then coming back into the marketplace. Remember the great what they call it, the great
resignation.
The great resignation. All this stuff, that's a loss in productivity. So what does that mean? Many of our banking economic indicators have to do with gross domestic product. It has to do with how much revenue we generate. So when you're non-productive, when people are quitting, when people aren't coming to work, but the government and the businesses still have to operate at the same capacity, there's a short gap. So we, the citizens of the United States, allowed this to happen to us. And now there's going to be some failures. There's going to be some discomfort. And we're coming back saying, no, I want to make more money. I work at, Burger King. I want to make 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, $20 an hour. I deserve it. Okay, well, maybe had we worked through COVID, maybe had you paid your rent, maybe had all these companies not needed to borrow money from the government so that they could at least pay the people that decided to show up, maybe you could get more money now. Because that is a social issue that we should fight for. But the problem is they fought for that social issue by sitting their ass at home and buying Teslas and not going to work and not paying rent and acting like they were balling.
All right, so
we can
put the rent aside. Let me ask you. So, like I say, so once again, just so I'm clear on this. So it's because I've always been of the belief that the larger banker, especially like as an example, the one that Joe Biden gets up at 9 o'clock in the morning to go make sure that they get their bailout money, even though their deposits exceed $250,000, like that group of people, right? Those people ultimately have way more sway and control, generally speaking, at least as far as the past and maybe even leading up to date and the current system we live in. They got way more sway or influence over that market than we do, right? You pull out $2 billion out of Bitcoin at any given time, or pull out $2 billion out of your one bank, your deposit could freaking cripple the whole, bank and say, I get it. But when you sit over there and you talk about how these banks literally went from a fractional lending model of keeping 10 cents for every dollar to no money on hand. And that was during the same time that we, as a country, you said we were over there buying Teslas and not paying rent and things of that nature, but the majority of those people who were not working, the country experienced a record high in savings during 2020. So all of that money was being put into those banks that they did not have to keep any money of it on deposit. So going back to that banking greed that you were speaking of before, and then secondly, when you speak of people who didn't want to work no. I think that the piper that has to be paid, I do agree that there's a COVID piper that has to be paid, but it's not from the people not being willing to work. It is from those city municipalities to a county, even municipalities that chose to shut down entire system. It wasn't people not wanting to work. There was whole system, we're going to shut down the downtown. So now there's no tax revenues coming in. And then like what winds up happening with some of my friends, who shall remain nameless, where they had contracts with the city that the city can't even pay them because they were taking federal dollars and allocating them towards city budgets because they didn't have tax revenue coming in because they were locking down everything. That's not the people doing that. That's the institutions doing that. Right, so you can blame the people for not paying rent. I get that part. But the whole rest of it, that's more the government and that centralized system that you were speaking out that we need to have as our, respective regulator of things. Which I'm not necessarily opposed to. I just say to a lesser degree.
Okay. So, I'll let the cat out of the bag. I didn't get the jab, and I felt like it was overkill. And as far as all the COVID stuff goes, I felt like it was overkill. I felt like, personally, but at the same time, as a citizen of 320 million people, I feel like the people felt like we don't know what's going on. And we feel like a bunch of people are dying, then we need to shut down until we figure something out because we feel like it's being spread in this manner. Now, I was in Oklahoma and I'm in cannabis, and cannabis was considered essential. So I never stopped nothing. I never stopped. I was visiting, I was working, I was in and out. But the only reason why I was able to do it is because I was considered to be essential. But the thing that I'm saying is we're talking about what's happening over the last 2 weeks as far as banking goes. And why I'm
Right.
saying Piper has to be paid is because all those companies, and I kept it going without any COVID money because I was in cannabis and they were gonna give me COVID money anyway. But I just have an issue dealing with any money that's coming from the government, too many strings attached. But the thing that I'm saying is those companies had to eventually start paying that back. And you have to make up for the decline that you received in productivity and all that type of stuff. So where do you go when the government stops cutting the checks? You go to the bank, to the lending institution. So now the lending institutions understand that we get more deposits when the economy is better. So now you have a sound business. You were sound a couple of years ago prior to COVID. Guess what we're going to do? We're going to make sure that we give you some money to keep you functioning because we know it's going to come back to us. So do I feel like going from 10% on hand to zero on hand is a good move? No. But at the same time, I can understand how the greed in that has caused some issues. But for the most part, look at all the other banks that are in that same position that haven't failed. And that is what has allowed these companies to rebound from not only having to pay employees, employee taxes, show growth, put out new products, but now they got to start paying the government back for the money that they lent. So that's all I'm saying is that at some point, the money has to come back, but it would be a whole lot less of a burden on people if people didn't sit their ass at home and collect the check for that whole time and not pay rent. Because one of the largest one of the most indicative economic indicators to our system, the way that we function and the way we determine the value of money in the United States is the real estate market. That's the way that we do it. So regardless of if it was COVID, people are going looking at that bottom line number, economic indicator. These are the numbers. This is what's happening. Oh, that's a problem. Real estate is a problem. The minute real estate is a problem, then that starts to affect all type of other economic indicators within our system, which changes interest rates, which changes money. The value of money and all. Just all that type of stuff. So right now, what we're going through is just the end. It's the bubble at the end of COVID, in my opinion.
I mean, and to be clear, that SVB Bank was not. It was like a commercial bank. It held money mainly for startups. So that wasn't just like a
Right.
regular bank for your average depositor. You know.
Right. But again, they got in trouble based on them saying that they weren't going to buy back their bonds
Right.
at this time, that they were going to push it later. So if I have a startup company and I put millions in it and the company is functioning, but I haven't seen a return on my investment yet, and then the bank is saying, nah, we're not buying our bonds back. What do you think I'm gonna do? Nah, I need my money. Go get my money out of that bank. So that's what happened. So
Right.
then when there was a run on the funds, they couldn't cover.
Right.
But they couldn't cover, there was no issue. They had a good sterling image. People in the startup tech community love SVB.
Right.
But what ends up happening though is when you make a bad greedy a bad greedy decision, then as a consumer, guess what I can do? I can choose to come out your bank. Now your bank failed. And so this is what I was trying to tell Khalil, or this is what I'm trying to explain. Ultimately, we play victim so much, but as consumers, we make the ultimate decision because we can go pull our deposits out from from Bank of America now. I don't care how big Bank of America is. We can pull our deposits out and move it to
Right.
somewhere else. That's our decision. But again, we love being victims, and apparently we like being taken advantage of by these big banks because we still continue to bank with them, whether it's Bank of America, whether it's Wells Fargo, whether it's I was about to say Wachovia. I don't even know if they exist anymore. Ain't that
Right.
Bank of America now?
Right.
But so I mean that's what it is. We still have the choice. We can go put all our money in credit unions, but then there's going to be there's going to be a repercussion for that. We can go put all our money in digital assets. There's going to be repercussions for that. So if we go throw all our money in digital assets and then we go throw all our money in credit unions, how are you going to get those commercial loans done? Oh, we're going to get it done through REITs and like Khalil said, hedge funds. Okay, well, hedge funds they want their money. A hedge fund gonna foreclose on you, take your assets, and leverage you and do all that type of stuff way before a bank would. So, and then most hedge funds, they giving you, I need my money in 2 years. I'm just giving you this money. I'm gonna make my little percentage on it, and then I'm expecting you to go to Bank of America and get a loan and buy me out. So this is hedge fund money. They're not giving long-term commercial loans, and you damn sure not gonna get a long-term commercial loan from a credit union. So, I mean, I don't see the system failing. I see two things happening. I see greed, and I see we're paying back for COVID.
Right.
And so those two things are really are putting a whole lot of pressure on the system right now, but it's happening simultaneously. And so it just looked to me, that pressure seems like, oh, there's something big about to happen. But listen to me, there's no way that you're gonna have decentralized fiat. Not in this society. Maybe 50 years ago, 100 years ago, but in the global economy, there's absolutely no way that governments need to run and they're going to allow their citizens to go put all this taxable money into a decentralized system where they have no control over the future of what the country's doing. We individually think very selfish. I'm not putting faith that our governments are doing what's best for us, but they have a larger breadth of what needs to happen in order to make sure that the bills get paid and the lights don't get cut off.
Okay, so here's a question that I have to ask, and this, I'm not going to deny that this does have I won't even use the word conspiracy theory attached to it. I just say it's extrapolation, logical extrapolation. Okay.
Okay.
We did have central banks previously in the United States, correct? They established themselves 3 times beforehand, correct? Most recent time was in 1913, and that's the one that we're currently dealing with, correct?
Right, yes.
Okay. And then the one that occurred previous to this was essentially booted out by Andrew Jackson, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So I mean, it's not a conspiracy theory at all. The presidential painting that Trump chose to hang behind him during the entire time of his presidency was Andrew Jackson, right? Mm-hmm. And there essentially is this belief, going back to this whole concept of, I was saying, of this parallel economy. If you look at the nations that are comprising BRICS, and then add the Saudi Arabia that just told the West no twice. Once was with this bailout. The first time was when Joe Biden went over there and begged them to keep the oil prices low through the election, and they told them no. That all of these countries are countries that had very good relationships, specifically with Donald Trump. And then also as well, that these BRICS nations, which now includes Mexico that's going for application, all starting with Russia through their trade embargo. So I paid attention to that trade embargo with the oil because that was the central bank's attempt to take the citizen, but take an entire nation of citizens who were saying, hey, you know what? Forget you and whatever it is that you essentially stand for with this whole NATO piece and all the rest of this stuff. And they say, you know what? We'll put trade in. And they say, okay, so you know what we'll do? We'll trade in our dollar, which we're now going to go through a massive buying spree with gold to back up our reserves. And then as far as international means of trade or methods of payment for trade, we'll also, along with our dollar, take gold and Bitcoin as alternative methods of payment. Brazil had just said that they were willing to do the same thing before Bolsonaro got ousted. So there, and then obviously, you know, countries like El Salvador and then countries that are popping up in Africa, whatever. So when you have countries that have the resources, most importantly, forget just what stage they might play militarily or on the UN stage or where the banking major headquarters are, but I'm talking about like where the resources are, especially the resources that back or support these dollars, whether it's the petro or whether it's AU, that these particular countries are now starting to come to a position. Like I forgot what was the most recent African country, but it was like basically when they was like, yo, we not dealing with the Batiman, no gayness over here. And then America was like, well, yo, you know what, we'll cut off funding with your banking and all that. And what they say, we don't need your aid. As a matter of fact, the aid was part of the problem in the first place. So like I do wholeheartedly believe that, you know, that 4-year period, as far as us going into a nationalism frame of mind, which caused on the international state of people to realize what or to even get a glimpse of what their life could be like without America as the oppressor, because America was solely concerned with what they were doing. That now these countries like Jamaica, hey, you know what, Queen of England, you're no longer sovereign. Barbados, Queen of, you know, like there's a mentality amongst the people where I wholeheartedly believe that, as once again, this digital currency is part of their plan. Like, yes, you could say that Bitcoin is decentralized and all the rest of this stuff, and that they don't want a decentralized currency. I don't disagree with that at all. We can take Turkey as an example. Their dollar, I think it was about 2 or 3 months ago, they started experiencing a hyperinflation where their dollars started decreasing by like 30% in 1 month. And what did the people do? They immediately started rolling all of their Turkish dollar into Bitcoin. And they were doing it at such a rapid pace that, as you said, the government ain't with that shit, right? They not wanting that to happen. So they immediately stepped in and tried to put in this embargo, or not embargo, that's not the right word, a restriction, a ban, to be like, not to say that you can't own Bitcoin, but that you can't use it as a means of business transaction, if you will, here in this country. But then we also see, like here in America, that states like Texas or states like Florida are saying, hey, you know what? We acknowledge and accept Bitcoin as a means of monetary money right now. So that's where I'm saying, like, I'm not in disagreement that things were the way that they were, but potentially going forward, because, like, as an example, the average person that sends Cash App, money through Cash App, can also buy some Bitcoin, just even though they ain't know nothing about it before. And that same COVID situation that you spoke of, with all of that extra stimulus money, I'm not going to deny people was buying extra Zaza packs and they was buying the new Jordans as they was coming out. But there was also a certain group of people that was like, yo, what's going on with these stocks? And maybe I should buy, you know, there was people that had extra time and was like watching extra conspiracy theory videos, you know, Zeitgeist and all of that. They had extra time, you know what I mean? So that's where I'm saying I believe that, and this is where me and Idris kind of fall into a not a disagreement. Like we acknowledge a whole bunch of things all the way up to a certain fork in the road, where it's like we do acknowledge that in the end, Allah says it in the Quran, right? In the end, the good must win through.
Yeah.
However, we are just at a difference of opinion in regards to when that end is. I'm of the belief that technology is playing this great equalizer where all of these people that were in these high positions of power are now being shifted in a way to where, like, the average content creator or the average musical artist, you know what I'm saying, can get, access to uh quick uh social media stuff go viral right fast, whereas before they had to go and get a record deal. So there's like different avenues now that these people are able to go through, where I believe that the portal's opening. Like, it's just like you said, I know it might sound idealistic, but I do believe that there are clear enough signs that are going on around us to be like, hey, you know what? Yeah, people did to moving it into another bank, or you know what? People are buying more uh, uh, doomsday or prepper type stuff, than they were in the past. People they're more aware. There were a lot more people that were saying, hey, you know what? I took the first level of vaccine, but I ain't going back to take that booster, because now they're more aware. They're seeing, hey, wait, people are just dropping dead or whatever. Like, they might have been scared before, but now they're awake to the whole situation. So that's all I was saying, was the human effect on the situation, where it's not just the X's and O's. I'm not discounting the X's and O's at all, but the X's and O's, the zeros and ones, are where our quantum computers come in. Where our chat GPT comes in and assists us in some level. But at some point, like, we as coaches, like, I might play fantasy football. I gotta have an eye test though. I gotta be able to be like seeing what the actual human dynamic of things in it. I just think that people are kind of fed up in a lot of ways with, whether you want to say fed up with Joe Biden, you want to say they fed up with the economy, fed up with paying $6 to $8 for a carton of eggs. Like, I don't know what the trigger points may be at this point, but I know that people are not satisfied with the way that things currently are, and they're not willing to just necessarily have the next stage be dictated to them.
So
now,
okay, so
what is your financial, I guess, opinion? I'm not looking for a rebuttal because it's not a debate.
Yeah.
Like, what's
Right, no, right. So let me just go back and respond to something that you said about the first, and I'm doing this not to, like you say, debate, but just to enlighten my point. So you said something about the first central bank shutting down when Andrew Jackson was president. When Andrew Jackson was president, when slavery existed, and so they had free labor. I'm not sure whether you heard that or not.
But repeat that again, because it just cut out on me for a second.
Yeah. No, I was saying that the central banking system that Andrew Jackson abolished happened 40, 50 years before slavery ended. So
right.
He wasn't looking at the same speculative interest-based type system that we were dealing with, because they had free labor. They had 4 million plus slaves for so there was no
very good point
to abolish system right. But so then we come to 1900. So then between that time up until around 1900, it was chaos. There were bank failures daily. People lost their money daily. Deposits were wiped out daily in the United States. So then the United States came and said, wait a minute, not the United States, we know the family. That's not conspiracy theory. But they came together and because they had an interest, and they said, this has to be solved because we don't have nowhere to put our money. So this issue needs to be solved. And because we're trying to grow and we no longer have free slaves, we no longer have free labor, how do we grow our economy from this point? What do we do? So this is where this whole fractionalized lending and that type of thing first came from, and it's been in place since 1903. So that means it's been working. Greed always plays an issue. but it's been working and maintaining our growth for over 100 years, 120 years to be exact, 1903. So can we agree on at least that point? We're not talking about the racism, we're not talking about redlining, we're not necessarily talking about how we've been politicized out of it. But for the United States, the current system has allowed for us to grow and get to the point that we are today.
No.
Okay.
And here's the reason why I would say I disagree with that statement. Because, all right, so we acknowledge that in 71, we came off the gold standard, right? Which was ironically the same year that this dude, Klaus Schwab, started the World Economic Forum. Whether you want to talk about from 1971, but especially from 1913. If you were to take the value of a dollar, which was pegged to gold, and look at the deflation or inflation, if you will, and the devaluation of the dollar bill, then you can very easily say that today's current dollar only represents 2%. It has lost 98% of the value that it had when it was pegged to gold. So what winds up happening is, that's why I always, the first time I had it explained to me and I really understood it or appreciated it as such, inflation is the invisible tax. So essentially we have this fiat graveyard where every so often they'll roll out a new form of currency, and whenever that currency comes out, that value of that new dollar buys less than what the last iteration of it could come. So now what we're doing right now is, if you look at this dude Klaus Schwab, who runs the World Economic Forum, dictates the policy for the International Monetary Fund, which obviously does the whole central bank thing, but does the Federal Reserve thing, which was pegged to the 1971 gold, taking us off the gold standard. He was saying that same 2020 piece, yeah, for everybody out there who wants to go read the book, he has a book that he wrote in 2020 called The Great Reset. And in that book, he spoke of this was the perfect situation or conditions to crash the entire system and bring about this digital currency. And what would be the means of intention or purpose behind it? Because as you go back to this same World Economic Forum meeting that they just had, it's a means of control. Because now they're trying to roll out this carbon emission score or something like that, where if your imprint is too much, you drive too much, you eat too much beef, or whatever that situation is, that they would essentially be in a position to be able to be like, okay, you know what, I'm going to cut off that person's money. And because we would now be tied into this digital system that they have put in place, that they would actually be able to do so no different than they would cut off our lights or our water. So that is something that the person who's dictating global economic policy, that's no conspiracy theory, nothing. He said it out of his own mouth in his own words and wrote it in books around that same period that you speak of. That's why it's like, I'm not necessarily in disagreement with a lot of the things that you say. I'm just speaking of like where I believe that we're headed in the future. Like, this is what they want. They want the system to collapse, because what usually would happen is they would have a war. They would have some situation that would happen that would be the means through which the dollar would crash, but we would not go back to them and blame them for it. Because if we actually did blame the central bank or the root as the root cause for this, then of course the system is not ever sustainable as a system where I'm continuing to borrow money to pay back money that I borrowed. At some point in time, we are going to have to pay that piper. And that the cycle is about a 40 to 50 year cycle. But luckily, or I should say whatever it is, they wanted Hillary to get in there. We most certainly were going to be continuing the war that in Ukraine that just got started back up again, but that Obama and Biden has started back in 2015 already. We were going to be going into a war scenario, which now, ironically, we have World War III on the verge, right? Because war is always the perfect way to go and crash a dollar. Where, all of a sudden Saddam's Iraqi dinar is now being used to burn, to heat stoves in the house. And then we just roll out a new dollar, and that new dollar buys less than what the previous dollar did. And all of a sudden there goes your invisible tax. So, like, this is not something that is, when you say that this is something that has only happened in the last couple of years, I don't disagree with that. But I look at it in the cycle of it being a 50-year system that first starts out with everybody saying, hey, you know what? Wait a minute, my salary just increased. Hey, wait a minute, you know what? My property value just increased. You're not looking at it as inflation. You're just looking at it like the economy is doing well. But then all of a sudden, at the end of that cycle, you got hyperinflation, you got job loss, you got high interest rates, you know what I'm saying? And you got a crash dollar. That's what happens at the end of that cycle. And that's why you got a whole photo or collection album book of currencies from around the world that we no longer use, like the franc. You know, we don't even talk about these currencies anymore. And it's like, so what is there? I understand that for the longest time, the US dollar was considered to be the source of stabilization as far as global economic policy is concerned. But then it's like, but how much are we really factoring in that maybe the people who run the globe want the globe to be ran the way it's ran out of China nowadays? And that's why they shifting, global leadership over to China and crippling us in the process. So I don't necessarily have, as you were saying, I don't have not only faith in the banking system, but I don't have faith that this global central banking collective wants to see America maintain the position that it has had since they took everybody off the gold standard and said, I'm not giving you back your gold right now.
So, when you talk about the cycle, the question I would have for you is, do you think that cycle, like, you recognize the cycle? I'm sure everybody recognizes the cycle. And I'm sure that the individuals that control these banking systems recognize the cycle. And so the cycle is not happening outside of their control. They know how to crash it and they know how to bring it back. So it is not it's not like helter skelter. You know what I'm saying? So it's not like a force of nature or act of nature. It's still within the control of whoever's orchestrating all of this stuff.
I'm glad you said that, because if you go back and listen to certain economists, what they'll tell you is that if the Federal Reserve truly had wanted to fix this inflationary situation that we're dealing with right now, what they would have did was they would have drastically hiked rates the way that they did back in the 90s with Clinton. And people would have been, when people were used to seeing 10, 15%, interest rates, by them hiking up rates a quarter point, little half a point here, it's like death by 1,000 cuts. This legitimately is what they would call a controlled demolition. So once again, I'm not in disagreement with you at all. I'm saying that's actually the way in which they're going about doing it right now. They are imploding the economy right now, so as to be able to say, okay, you know what? We're going to bring in this digital currency. And then at that point, now that's the end game. Now we have total control over not only the economic system, like we were already able to, like Kanye cut off your Apple Pay because you said something anti-Semitic or something like that. Or if you was the truckers protesting in Canada, we can cut off your PayPal. Like, we already had control over the card aspect of things. But now we want to take it to that next level, which is what they got in China, which is you got citizens with this citizen credit score, where it's like if you talk out too much, if you say something on social media that they don't like, or, you know what I'm saying, you spreading disinformation, you say you don't like the vaccine or anything of the sort, then all of a sudden they have a way to financially address the situation.
So
that's not a conspiracy theory. That's what they do.
I don't disagree with that.
That's total conspiracy theory.
That's a complete conspiracy.
That's what they're doing in China right now.
I'm not talking about China. You're talking about communism, and you're talking about the government actually valuing what it's all pencil with paperwork.
You're saying that in the last we haven't been practicing communism? We haven't been giving up. We haven't been censoring. We haven't been pushing for disarmament.
Let me
huh?
We let me tell you this back. I listen.
In
This is where
practice.
we gonna to. This is where we gonna totally diverge.
Okay,
So
that's
first
cool.
of
All right,
all,
all right, all right.
so first of all, in America, money crashes follow decadence. So at the end of Civil War, economies crashed. It was a war. Okay, that was a legitimate war. People were fighting for. It was economics, but one side wanted slavery. One side was like, hey, we can make more money if we don't have slaves so we can collect more taxes. Either way, it was about money. So then what happens? 50, 60 years later, we forget about the hard times. And what happens? Now we got the roaring 20s. What happens at the end of the 20s? The crash.
Mm-hmm.
So then what ends up happening? Another 50, 60 years. The decadence, the 70s. An economic crash. So then what happens? The same thing. 2008, another crash. So it happens over when we become decadent, when we become live above our means, when we play more than we work and toil, when enjoyment is more important than economic gain, when individualism becomes more important than gross domestic product. Because if you watch, it's certain key economic indicators that you have to watch. When that gap between what we import and what we export, when that number changes negatively, that's where we lose money. Why? Because we have to make money off the resources. We have to make more money off the resources that we put out into the world than we spend bringing into the world.
Agreed.
So inflation. So that's the major economic indicator for inflation, not people in the room being like, what can I do to Khalil today? I want to. This is crazy. So these 50-year cycles coincide with being removed from. You have them. Where they say your grandfather starts a war. Your great grandfather starts a war. Your grandfather makes peace. Your father works hard. You create art, and your son loses it all. 50 years. So every 5 or 6 generations, the generation gets so far removed from the bad time. Like it's like oh, that really didn't exist. That's something great granddad did. They get so far removed from austerity. You get so far removed from bread and butter, work hard. This is more important than that. The family core becomes smaller and smaller till it becomes the individual. So great granddad had grandma, auntie, his sister, his brother-in-law, all living in this big house together, paying bills, and then spreading out. And then over time, eventually, that community becomes a singular individual that decides, I want to be the bad auntie. I don't want to have no kids. I'm doing this. I'm doing that. I'm not building nothing. It's just decadent. And so that's what happens. So all those 50-year cycles that you're talking about coincide with the decadence of further and further and further and further removed generations from the hardships. So then you go back through the hardship. So the kid that loses it all, that kid has to grow up during the Great Depression. So he's back hungry again. He sees the problems. He's starved and he don't get to eat every day. So now he becomes hardened. And now he becomes austere. He becomes, I'm a man of my word. I don't believe in credit. I don't believe in, I'm going to do what I got to do. I'm not going to scam because the only thing I got in this world is me and my word. The stuff that we all say we do, because it sounds good in the movie, but we don't do it in real life. So those are the 50, 60-year cycles that you're talking about, not people in the boardroom saying, let's crash the economy so I can get in Khalil's pocket. That happens every day because bankers are greedy, because people sitting on Wall Street are greedy and they're trying to squeeze every dollar out of their investment that they can. That's not them saying, I'm going to crash the dollar because I want to get more money. Okay. That doesn't make sense.
Wait. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
So if you have, again, there's a 50-year cycle, like you're saying, based probably naturally. Let's say if the phenomenon you're speaking about, Riyaad, is a natural process of human development. You get comfortable after you work hard, and then you build something, and then you eventually become so weak that you can't tell men from women and women from men, and then now it's time for you to get destroyed. Like, how do you can identify this cycle? You just laid it out, but aren't there think tanks? Aren't there people that, when they have a 20-30 plan, there's people that plan decades in advance?
Because you can't plan. Because the great thing about capitalism, and this is why I say we always come from a victim standpoint or a paranoid standpoint. Ultimately, you cannot make consumers purchase or spend money or save money. That's the great thing about capitalism. But you know what you can do on an economic downturn? I can make money. You see what I'm saying? Capitalism is all about the pivot. And so if I'm comfortable sitting on my couch and I need to pivot, and I don't pivot, but I'm like, man, I was sitting here on my couch and everything was fine. Then all I want to do is talk about the good old days. But who knows how to pivot and make money? The kid that heard the stories about great granddad and how great granddad fought, and then listen to the stories over the generation and sees his weak, sorry dad. That kid knows how to pivot. That kid knows that when you look at all the great companies, they would literally change a whole assembly line in a matter of a week. Like, oh, this is the new hot thing. This is the real McCoy, where we even get that term from. Within a week, Ford had literally turned his whole manufacturing facility around so that they were putting the real McCoy, whatever that piece, into the engine and make it work better. This is what I'm saying. We don't do that. Today, what do people do? These weak, soft people go to the government and say, we're too big to fail. And so this is what I'm saying. So that cycle has to do with our weakness.
The weak people do that? The weak people do that, or the
weak people do it? The weak people do it, and I'll tell you why the weak people do it. Because we live in houses that we can't afford. We purchase cars that we can't afford. We spend money on credit cards that we can't afford to pay back. We should only be having a $100,000 house, but we can make a mortgage payment on a $250,000 house, and we get the $250,000.
Who's giving us that credit?
They're in the business to make money. Again, that's the victim. Who's giving us that credit? Who's signing the paperwork to go get the loan for $250,000 when they should only have a $100,000 3-bedroom house? Because the way that they market it and sell it is, your payment is this much. We want to take 30% of your income. We see that's a failed system. They marketed us to the point that we go into the system already brainwashed and being like, oh, well, this is 30% of my income. I can afford this. Why would you do that? Why would you go into it and give up 30% of your income for your house when you can live just as comfortable at 15% or even 20% and do something austere or do something that's going to benefit you and your family with that additional 10, 15%?
But that's what I'm saying. But that's what I'm saying. Yeah. There are powers that be that can make the so you're saying the thing about capitalism, you can't make a person blah blah blah, but you can make people do stuff. You can
they can't make you. They can't make you. They can't make you They can't make you buy more house than you really can afford. You are a complete idiot if you feel like 30% is what you should. I should take 30% of my income and pay for my house. But if you are a complete idiot, you're a complete idiot if you say, give me a 30-year mortgage. I can afford this. Give me a 30-year mortgage.
But you do know that that's how society is run, by normalization, by commercials, by showing you stuff on TV. What they call that they manufacture consent. They manufacture. But that's how society runs. They don't. You go to school. They don't. You go to school. They don't give you. Okay.
This is what the issue is, and I cannot allow you to push victimization because this is how simple it is. Oh, how do I how do you charge me interest? Okay, so it's accruing quarterly. Okay, so that means that if I borrow $250,000, every quarter is going to accrue at 4%. So that means every quarter I'm no. Let me make it simple. If I go get this 200,000, so that means every quarter I'm paying $8,000 in interest. Okay, so my house note is how much? $1,900. So in 3 months, how much do I pay? Oh shit, that's not $8,000. So I'm actually accruing more interest than okay. So let me figure this out. So that means that if I'm paying accrued interest 4 times a year at $8,000, or it's going to be fractionally less because you're paying towards it. But let's just say you say 8,000, 7,000, 6,000, 5,000 by that. Okay, so that means that means every year I'm paying $20,000, $25,000 for this loan. So maybe I can't afford this $200,000, $250,000 house just because I can make the payment. Or, okay, so this house is $250,000. I know I can pay less than half the interest if I get a 15-year mortgage. So can I afford that note? No, I can't afford that note because now my note goes from $1,900 to $2,700 a month. Okay, well, I can't afford this house. We don't do that. That's not what we do. So again, we play victim and then say it's a conspiracy, it's the government, it's the boogeyman, it's somebody telling me, but we're making the decision.
But that doesn't negate the fact that there is someone telling you. There's an active there's an active force that is.
So that black people are fat and dying of diabetes and heart disease because Jimmy Dean is saying, "Come get these sausages."
Yes.
Come on, that don't make no man. That it's too much.
Why does Jimmy Dean do commercials? Why do I sit here?
100 years ago.
Why do I sit here and watch a basketball game and watch 15 commercials?
Jimmy Dean is doing a commercial to let you know that I have a pork product out there. I've never heard a Jimmy Dean commercial to say, "Hey, eat this; it's going to be good for you."
I guess and I agree that this is where I guess the dividing line is, and it's okay. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. No. Yeah,
definitely. From a different perspective. It's like how Einstein says, right? Every perspective is true. When you're trying to factor in the totality of reality, you have to allow for everybody's perspective to be calculated as a truth. So with that being said, I take what you say wholeheartedly in that there is for sure, like for instance, like with smoking cigarettes as an example, it's not necessarily a victimization. Like, yes, they do put that Surgeon General's warning out there. That shit definitely is to kill your ass. But you actually put that cigarette in your mouth and light it up and spark it, no matter what type of additive or whatever they put in it. But at the same time that's the case, we have to acknowledge that there is an opposing force, right, in what it is that's being put out there. So whether you want to limit it,
greed, not conspiracy, greed.
Oh no!
I don't see how it is different, because if you say product placement, right? So cigarettes, you brought up cigarettes. The government said you cannot smoke cigarettes on TV shows. You cannot show characters smoking cigarettes in movies. Prior to them saying that, the cigarette companies hired admin to say, okay, we watch a Rambo, make Rambo smoke Marlboro. And so there is a reality of a conspiracy to have people smoke Marlboro cigarettes, and they do things to make.
Okay, but can we acknowledge that language-wise, there is a difference between someone influencing you to do something versus someone forcing you to do something?
Of course.
All right. So at the point when someone forces me to do something, that's when I feel like there's no there should be no issue about me saying I'm a victim.
I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you said that. Show me. And I'm glad you said that because we're talking about banking now, and we're talking about you're gonna show me where you have been forced to deal with a banking system that is taking advantage of lenders and having to back their and having to collateralize their loans with nothing. Show me where you've been forced to deal with that bank. Or do you have the choice to be like, they're not good stewards of money and they're not good stewards of the American economy. I'm not dealing with Goldman Sachs. You have that choice.
Absolutely, and that's one of the reasons why I was saying earlier in the conversation why I still put my money in credit unions. You know what I'm saying?
Khalil, your mic is sounding mad crazy.
Might sound crazy?
Oh, it sounds better now.
Yeah, better now. I think your finger was on.
Okay, but yeah, it's like that. That's why I was even saying like, yeah, I'd rather rock with credit unions. Like you do have a choice with. Now, I'm glad that you brought up that point because once again, then later on, people are going to be forced with a decision. Like for instance, I have survival coins, and for those that don't know what those survival coins are, that's where you buy coins that were minted but before 1964, especially, well, basically coins that have 90% silver. You know, the quarters, the dimes, and the nickels that are U.S. minted that are 90% silver. So at any given point in time where ish were to hit the fan, if you will, you know, like as an example that, you know, hey, if you have a nickel and it's 5 grams, that's 4.5 grams of silver. So I do acknowledge that, you know, that there are, you know, different choices that people can make, whether it is precious metals, whether it is Bitcoin, whether it is saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to accept this digital currency or the new blue stripped dollar bill that they decide to come out with. So that's where I'm glad you made that point, because that's the ultimate point that I'm making. Is that yes, we have an agenda that is being put in place by the central bank that I believe ultimately ends or rests in them wanting to create a system of stability where they have total control over the daily transactions and what we even are spending our money on, versus the people, just like how you said they'll have a choice about where they choose to bank, or if they choose to eat the Jimmy Dean hot sausage or whatever, they're going to have a choice about what type of currency they want to use as a method of transaction. Even if they say, oh, you know what, since they banned Bitcoin, we make the personal decision where we just going to just trade. You got some corn and I got some tomatoes. Like, we even have the flexibility to do that. You got some chicken and I got some beef, and we'll do a swap. Like that is very much so within the realm of possibility for the human being, that like where it's like they only have but to so much a degree of control, where they can't just automatically force us into whatever new central banking system they want to put out there. I'm glad that's the ultimate point that I'm trying to make with that.
Okay. Well, let me say this because it's getting late too, and
we can wrap it up at this point.
We can wrap it up, but let me just say this: if what you guys are saying does happen, and there's a total meltdown of the banking system as we know it, anytime in the near future, the most valuable thing is not going to be silver, gold, any of that. The most valuable thing is going to be bullets. So
and food.
You got bullets, you got food. so I just said. So but anyway, this was a good conversation.
You got bullets, you got food.
You got bullets, you got food.
Wait, hold on. And on that note, don't think that it's no coincidence that we've been having all of these mass shootings and Joe Biden coming out there saying that even 9mm bullets need to be taken up off the market. So that's a very valid point that you make, where it's like, yes, at a certain point in time, the battle of the bullet, like Malcolm X used to say, they are very much aware of the fact that the people having access to their guns and their ammo is a way for them to not have control over us, to go along with that digital currency. So as they are trying to roll out this stuff, they are simultaneously trying to put an attack or an assault on the guns and the bullets. That's a dual process thing, because of what you said is 100% true.
Listen, personally, and this is 100% honest, I would personally believe, I personally believe more that there's an alien life, higher beings out there that's pulling strings over this mysterious global network of people that we can't uncover, and we can't point to one of them directly, and no one's ever, lost any information that we can read, or there's never been any notes that escape, and all this big agenda thing. Because first of all, humans don't even like each other, especially rich humans. They, for the most part, people on that level, they could pull those type of strings. They couldn't even sit in the same room together. We're not talking about multi-millionaires. We're not even talking about billionaires. We're talking about people like the Queen of England that just passed away, or the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, and so this is the level of the Habsburgs. All these type of people, like the Habsburgs were so reclusive into themselves and hated people to the point that they had the Habsburg list because they only intermarried each other. To the point that that whole line of people looked retarded. They're
13
inbred.
Venetian families. We talk about them. Just the 13 Venetian
Right.
family. But we know about the George Soros. We know about the Klaus Schwabs. We know about these folks who go and meet at these Bilderbergs and these G20 summits and these World Economic Forums that serve as the spokesman for those people, at least out in the public. And they are very much so letting it be known that, yes, we do want to have a carbon emission score. We do want to have a central bank currency. We do want to have lockdowns. Like if it wasn't for the fact that, even though I'm not a fan of the vaccine, I mean, they tried to do so many other different things to keep us out of lockdown. They initially wanted us in lockdown till 2025. Like they definitely wanted to crash the global economy. When you think about people sitting on their behind, or the communism aspect of things, they definitely wanted to be giving us stipends long enough to be able to just go and get rid of all the mom and pop stores, make Amazons and all the rest of these big mega conglomerates, the bigger the banks, the bigger wholesale retailers, whatever, and basically have a whole new world that we step out into. Now, thankfully, it didn't manifest itself like that, but yes, we are very much in a situation where I believe, and I'll end it on this, I ain't got nothing else to say after this. I just am you call me idealistic or whatever. But I'm a believer in the people, like you said, that thing that you mentioned about capitalism, where it's like it more so than, regardless, even if there are people, like how I believe, that are sitting up there, like, who tell Joe Biden, hey, you know what, on your first day in office, get rich, shut down that Keystone pipeline, because that's going to be the very beginning of the end of the petrodollar if you shut down the freaking oil pipelines and start, like, yes, even though I acknowledge that there are people up there that are doing stuff like that, I still am always going to be a believer that the thing that will ultimately run the capitalist market is the will of the people. And that the people at some point are going to choose, I ain't with whatever's going on right now. Hopefully. You say ideally, but hopefully that's what's going to happen with this.
All right. So that was a lively conversation. It's getting a little late, so we're going to shut it down. Inshallah, we'll wrap it up, and we can maybe pick up again next week, talking about something similar, and how the weeks go by so fast, so much turmoil happens. There should be some of this stuff should manifest itself by the end of the week. Something else should have popped up to verify or validate some of these dispositions. Maybe when all the banks fall down or something, then
Right, but let me just say this. I just got to say there's volatility happening every day. We just don't pay attention to it the way we pay attention to banks. And the other volatility that happens every day probably affects our lives more, and we don't even know. We don't know the companies. We don't know the companies that are owned by companies. And so this is just I'm telling you, there's no way within the next 100 years, unless there is a global war, that our American banking system is going to go from where it is right now, that's feeding and taking care of all these people, to a decentralized new digital fiat, and where people just have total choice according to the ebbs and flows of the marketplace. I can't see people would. There would be civil war, and half of America would be dead within 10 years.
Well, as Trump has very, has said, we are on with World War III and invasion of, Taiwan by China and Ukraine and Russia and all that stuff. Apparently, we are very much so at the brink of all of those things. So not only do, central bank folks want to use that as a very convenient excuse to go about crashing some type of country's currencies, it also is a means by which, major energy changes take place. So, like I say, I would you say not in 100 years, I would venture to say that within the next 6 months, I actually have it in my calculations as the end of the second quarter going into the third quarter. As they raise the interest rates, they're going to do a half a point hike right at that point. They're going to raise the rates each month. And then at the end of that last half point marker, that we are going to experience not only a real estate market crash, but a tech bubble crash. There is going to be a financial sector crash. Like it's like all of those bubbles that you spoke of in the past that we had. Yeah, we had a tech bubble in 90-something. We had a stock bubble in this, and then we had a housing bubble in this. That we are at a point in time now where we're at the end of the cycle for all of those things, and they've kicked the can down the road too far, and all of those are getting ready to come to pass, which is going to cause this major trigger of, we need to do something drastic, like put in a digital currency, and it'll happen just the way it just did with this last go around. On a Friday, they'll be like, hey, you know what? We had a glitch, or there was a crash, or whatever it is. We need to take the weekend to do a nice little reset, just like how they was doing over here with the Bank of Switzerland and all that, Credit Suisse, while the markets are down, to limit the amount of volatility that takes place, because the markets ain't open. And then by the time Monday comes around, you know what I'm saying, you're basically walking into a whole new world. And so these are, you look at it like that was an isolated event. I call it a test run.
All right.
So we'll leave it there.
It's March 9th, March 19th. So we're going to timestamp this video.
Timestamp it.
So you got 6 months, buddy.
It's all good.
All right, so we'll wrap it up for today. Last nice episode of Bean Pod Chronicles. And until next time, inshallah, we'll see you brothers. Stay safe.
All right, man. Appreciate the time. Assalamu alaikum.
Looks like